Get started. So good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining us for our monthly Distinguished Speaker Series, sponsored by the Save Our Seas Foundation. Tonight, we'll be discussing manta rays, what I think to be one of the most majestic creatures on Earth, with our special guests, Jessica Pate, a researcher and founder of the Florida Manta Project, breaking new ground on the study of manta ray ecology in the South Florida region, and Dr. Guy Stevens, one of the foremost experts on the topic, studying manta rays all over the world, and who is also the CEO and co-founder of the Manta Trust, which oversees conservation and research projects in over 25 countries. Thank you both for joining us tonight. Looking forward to it. Before we begin, I'd just like to go over a few guidelines for our audience tonight. Microphones are going to be muted the whole time. Feel free to turn on your cameras, though. It can make it a little weird to be presenting to an invisible audience. But also feel free to keep your anonymity if you'd like. And we'd encourage you to ask questions. You can put your questions in the chat at any time throughout the presentation. And then at the end, we'll save a good amount of time at the end to come back to any of those questions. So throughout the presentation, definitely put any questions that come into your head into the chat. We'll be collecting them throughout, and we're gonna come back to them at the end for a discussion with our experts. Most importantly, please join me in welcoming tonight's special guests. Dr. Stevens, Jessica, thank you for joining us tonight.
Happy to be here.
So, Dr. Stevens, I'd like to start with you. You're going to tell us something about your work with the Manta Trust and your history of research with manta rays. So I will turn it over to you at this point.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Brady. Hi, everyone. I can't see you all, but I'm going to talk to you today, as Brady said, just really give you a bit of an overview about manta rays and their ecology, behavior, and some of the threats that they face. And so I kind of won't go into anything in great detail. I'll leave that for Jessica to do more specifically to the population in Florida that she's been studying. So I'll attempt to share my screen now and get the presentation up. See if this works.
Yep.
All right. So as Brady said, I'm the CEO and co-founder of the Manta Trust. My whole life has been consumed by manta rays for the last couple of decades. I did an undergraduate in marine biology in the UK, where I'm from, at the University of Plymouth. And I got this amazing job working in the Maldives as a marine biologist, and that's where I had my first kind of interactions with these animals, which really sort of drew me into their world, and I've spent the last sort of 20 years trying to learn as much about them as I can, and subsequently trying to help protect them. And so it's hopefully I'll impart to you today some of my love for these animals, and hopefully at the end we can have a discussion about why these animals are important to protect, and more broadly the importance of ocean conservation. So I'll get into the slide. There we go. So starting with the basics, what are manta rays? Well, they're fish, and most people realize that, but they actually belong to the same group as all the other sharks. So these cartilaginous elasmobranch fishes, there's about 1,400 different species. They're split roughly 50-50 between the sharks and the rays, and they've been around for a long time, hundreds of millions of years. So the first shark fossils can be found back 370 plus million years, and you can see a diagram on the slideshow there of a species that was around at that time. And so they've been a very successful group of fish. They persisted in the oceans, evolving into new species over time. And you can see there's many similarities to the modern day sharks as there are with these ancient species as well. These series of paired gill slits, which are characteristic of the sharks and the rays, these fixed dorsal fins that give them rigidity and help them to propel themselves through the water. And they all have internal reproduction as well, which I'll talk about with mantas in a little bit more detail in a second. And the rays, well, they kind of diverged from the sharks, their ancestors, about 160, 200 million years ago. And really, this is a divergence to an adaptation that is predominantly designed to help them live on the seabed. So we think about most rays, they're this flat, round, sort of squashed-like shark. And this is a way to help blend in to the seabed. It helps you to be camouflaged from your predators, but also your prey. So most of the rays, they're benthic, they live on the bottom. But what we're going to focus on are the what we call the mantas and the devil rays. Collectively, they're in their own family, Mobulidae, and at the moment we have 10 described valid species, and there's a kind of question mark in my presentation there, because I think, as Jessica will talk to you about in a little bit, there's constant updating to our knowledge about these animals, and it's thought that there's at least another species of manta in the Caribbean, and there's also some still disagreement about the exact taxonomy of some of the smaller devil ray, the pygmy devil ray relatives of the mantas. So collectively, this group of rays, they're specialized at filter feeding, and unlike their benthic cousins, these animals live up in the water column, and they use these long, elongated pectoral fins, almost like birds, to kind of fly through the water. So they propel themselves through the water using these extended fins, and they have these horn-like projections off the front of their head, these cephalic lobes or cephalic fins. You can see on that manta, a stealth bomber looking black manta at the bottom there. When they're rolled up, they look like horns, but when they unfurl them to feed, which you'll see in a second, this helps to funnel the water into their mouth to consume the small prey that they eat, this tiny microscopic zooplankton. So they're all filter feeders. They've been around relatively recently in the fossil record, so they're highly derived, and only about 20 million years old as a group. And they have the largest brains of all the fishes as well. So mantas are big, and their brains are large as well. So if we sort of narrow down into the mantas now, as I said, there's possibly another third species in the Caribbean, but the two current valid species are the oceanic mantas, which have this circumtropical range throughout the tropical and temperate oceans of the world. They grow very large, 7 meters is a huge animal. It's one of the largest fishes in the ocean. And they tend to, as the name suggests, occupy slightly more oceanic habitat, so slightly more offshore, away from the shallow reefs in most places. And then the other species, the reef manta, as the name suggests, are more associated with reef habitats. And they're still huge, 4+ meters, average wingspan of about 3 meters. And these are found around coral reef systems, coral atolls, places like the Maldives, where I've spent a lot of time studying them. In terms of predation, these animals are pretty big, even when they're born. I'll show this on the next slide. They're large animals. So only really the largest of the ocean predators would seek out manta rays as an easy prey item. So we're looking at the biggest of the sharks, the big predatory sharks like tiger sharks or great white sharks in an area where they have overlapping territory. Great hammerhead sharks, bull sharks, and of course some of the marine cetaceans as well, like the orca. These are all been observed or recorded to predate on mantas. And they cause pretty nasty injuries. Often the mantas survive these attacks. It's amazing how they have the ability to sustain these huge chunks, these bites out of their pectoral fins. And they're even able to heal large sections of their wing that may have been bitten. So the two images on the bottom left of your screen show the same manta ray with a period of about a year between the bite being relatively recent, within a couple of weeks, and the scar tissue healing back up this portion of the wing. So although they're big and although they are susceptible to this predation, manta rays are pretty well adapted to survive these attacks. And we think about a manta, I have some nice props with me here. It's a big flat animal, and it's quite hard for a shark to get its teeth and mouth around it. So actually, often the shark will try to attack from behind. This warning system of the tail gives an alert to the manta to help it try and avoid being predated on. The manta can see pretty well in front of it, round to the side of it, but it's a bit vulnerable from behind and below. And so the sharks often grab them in these areas where they're the most vulnerable to attack, but none of the vital organs of the animal are in that area of the wing, which is why they're able to survive these injuries. But they don't have a sting in the tail. People often ask me, do mantas have any way to defend themselves? Really, their defense is being really big when they're born. They have a pretty fast turn of acceleration, and they also have very good maneuverability. So if they get predated on, they will actually flip quickly forward and try to present a really large surface area to a predator. It's very difficult for a shark to get its teeth around if the manta's just kind of keeping side on to the threat. So for these animals, if you're a person studying these animals, one of the best places to observe them is at social aggregation sites. And cleaning stations, many of you will be familiar with these, whether you're in the Caribbean or the Indo-Pacific. There are these areas on the reef, often these prominent outcrops of reef, coral bommies, etc., where small fish and indeed shrimps act as cleaners to these large mobile species. So for mantas, these little fish serve as a really important function to remove parasites and dead skin, clean wounds, etc. And of course, conversely, for the little cleaner fish, this is literally a huge dinner plate that turns up for them to dine upon most of the time. So these aggregation areas are important for cleaning, but they're also important for socialization, for reproductive activities, and it's a great place, of course, for us to go and research them as well. And the other location we tend to find these animals in aggregations are around feeding hotspots. And these animals work often in groups to coordinate their feeding effort. They have strategies to maximize foraging success, whether that's sort of somersaulting backwards, as you can see in the top left, or feeding in these long chains. These animals will feed together, often in these ephemeral feeding events in productive hotspots of upwelling. Reproduction. Mantas, as I said at the beginning, like all sharks and rays, have internal reproduction. So that means that they actually will have to come together to mate. This means that the males have external sexual organs. We call these claspers. They're two modified fins either side of the tail. And if you look down at the belly of any shark or ray, you can see these claspers if it's a male. And as the male matures, the claspers get longer, more calcified. And this is what it uses to mate with the female. And the image at the bottom on the right shows a male grasping hold of the wingtip of a female. And he's trying to position himself belly to belly, like the image in the center, where he will then fertilize the female. So they have these elaborate courtship behaviors of males chasing females, which allows the females to select the male that she wants to mate with. And indeed, often we believe she mates with multiple males during the same period of receptiveness to mating. And about 13 months later, the females give birth to one pup, nearly always one pup, and it's very large, 1.5 to 2 meters in wingspan when it's born, and that's it. The animal has then a life of no parental care thereafter. It goes off to live a life in motion and to forage and fend for itself. Okay, so moving on to just touch on some of the threats. Obviously, globally, there's many threats to these animals. I believe Jessica's going to talk about some of the work that she's done, which talks about the problems with boat strikes and fishing line entanglement, pollution, etc. But really, I'll just touch on the biggest threats globally, and those threats are bycatch fisheries. So when you have lots of nets around the world, whether that's catching these animals as target species or unintended victims as incidental bycatch, this is a big problem. So gill nets, purse seine nets, Also, we have issues around things like mooring lines. That's a problem in countries where there's lots of human development. And unfortunately, directed, targeted fisheries. So people going out specifically to try and hunt these animals. And this is not so much for their meat, this is more for a demand that has sprung up in the last decade or so for their gill plate. So this is the part of the manta that they use to capture the actual zooplankton that they prey upon. This is believed to have medicinal properties in Asia, mostly in China. And so as a result, there's been targeted fisheries to catch these animals, to cut out the gills, which you can see happening in that picture on the screen. The gill plates are then dried, sent over to China, and as a result, this has led to some really steep declines in manta populations around the world. So you add these targeted fisheries, the bycatch and all these other threats, and you unfortunately have a very vulnerable group of animals, which are all being continuously reassessed, and unfortunately the trend is negative, meaning that they're becoming more and more threatened. So that's it from me. I think Brady mentioned at the start that the Manta Trust works all over the world. We're an international organization. We're based in the UK. We're also registered in the US as Action for Mantas. And really, the Manta Trust is an umbrella organization, and we try to collaborate and work with as many people involved in ocean conservation as possible. And we see manta rays as a flagship species to drive the conservation of our oceans more broadly, and obviously our focus is on protecting these species specifically. So, you know, education, research, it's fundamental to the work we do. And, you know, I hope that, you know, this will draw you into the world of mantas if you weren't already. And if you've got any questions, you want to know more about the work we do, you can visit our website, you can follow us on social media, you can reach out to me directly, and I'll be happy to respond. So thank you very much, and I'll hand it over to Jessica.
Guy, can you stop sharing your screen? So hi, everyone. So Guy provided a lot of great information on basic manta ray biology, and I'm going to talk to you a little more about what we're doing here in Florida to learn about manta rays. So my name is Jessica Pate. I'm the founder of the Florida Manta Project with the Marine Megafauna Foundation. And the Marine Megafauna Foundation, we, like the Manta Trust, do work around the world, and our focal species are manta rays and whale sharks. So I'm first going to tell you a little bit about myself, because I didn't set out to study manta rays. I kind of stumbled upon it along my career path. But I originally moved to Florida about 10 years ago after my undergraduate degree to study sea turtles. And I don't know, for those of you who live in Florida, you might be familiar with the people who drive the ATVs up and down the beach. That was me. So we're always out there looking for the tracks of the turtles that nested the night before. So I spent a lot of time on the beach. And while I was out on the beach, I would sometimes look over into the ocean and see manta rays swimming by in really shallow water, sometimes like thigh deep water. And I was kind of shocked that we had manta rays in Florida. I was a biologist and a scuba diver, and I had never heard anyone talk about seeing manta rays while diving on the reef. So I did some research on them, and I was again stunned to find that no one had ever conducted any research on Florida manta rays. The kind of stuff you'll find when you look for research on Florida manta rays is you'll find old pictures like this from around, from the turn of the 20th century. I don't know if anyone knows who that guy is. That's our former president, Teddy Roosevelt. And you'll find essays like this about fishermen and scientists who basically went out and harpooned manta rays. That's illegal now. But so basically nothing is known about the Florida Manta Rays, which led me to start the Florida Manta Project back in 2016. And we just published our first paper on Florida Manta Rays last month. So now I'm going to share with you guys a quick video because I think the best way to show you guys manta rays is the beautiful videos of them about our first few years of research. It's just a couple minutes.
Feel free to bother. Feel free to bother. No need to create a scene. Feel free to bother. No need to create a scene. Feel free to bother. Feel free to bother. No need to create a scene. Feel free to bother. Page of your history, of your history, of your history.
So basically what we found in our first years of research is that we're seeing almost exclusively juveniles here in Florida, which is pretty rare to observe only juveniles in a manta ray population. And what's surprising to most people when we do interviews with people who've seen manta rays here in Florida, they're always like, I saw this enormous ray. And I'm like, actually, it was a baby manta ray because these guys are still juveniles at 6 to 10 feet across. And what we're seeing here, as everyone here well knows in South Florida, that we have a lot of people and these manta rays are coming into contact with the people who are using the water. So we see them being hit by boats, we see them entangled in fishing line. And manta rays were listed on the US Endangered Species Act in 2018, but NOAA doesn't have enough data to designate critical habitat for the manta rays. So we really need to learn more about them in order to protect them. And so some of the future work we'll be doing here is the mitigation of anthropogenic impacts, especially we're doing work with fishermen. We just, we finished a project last year where we interviewed 200 recreational shore fishermen and asked them, do they know what a manta ray is? What would they do if they saw one? Have they caught one before? So based on the results of that study, we've designed these signs that are going to be hung at local fishing piers and inlet jetties so that fishermen know what to do when they see a manta ray to avoid catching one, because most fishermen don't want to catch them because they're not fishing with the kind of tackle that could adequately reel one in. They're going to lose their fishing gear if they hook one. So we're working with fishermen and trying to recruit them to become citizen scientists to report their sightings of manta rays. We're also working to define the physical and biological characteristics of the critical habitat. And what that means in simpler terms is we need to understand why they are using this habitat in South Florida as opposed to a habitat somewhere else. This is the really important data that you need in order to provide protections. And so what we're doing with that is we're collaborating with NOAA, the federal government, to satellite track manta rays to understand where they're going. Because right now we're using boat-based surveys, but that really limits the amount of area you can go and see where the mantas are. So here's an example of a juvenile male manta ray that we tracked in the summer of 2019. We tagged him, I don't know if you can see my cursor, we tagged him around Hobe Sound or the Jupiter area. And he basically took off straight north to this kind of Daytona area and then traveled back south along the coast, went down to Miami, and then went back up to Hobe Sound. So this is a track that lasts about 2 months. And what it's showing is this might be some important habitat right here where we originally tagged the manta, since this manta is returning there, but that they are also utilizing the entire coast of Florida. So these animals are really capable of long distance migrations. We're also doing aerial surveys. So we fly in little single prop Cessnas, and this allows us to cover more area than we would in a boat-based survey. I had to get over my fear of small planes very quickly when we got a grant to do this. But this has helped us understand where they're distributed along the coast. And we also will be expanding our work. So our work right now is taking place in South Florida, and this is where we have the nursery ground for the juvenile manta rays. But there's also a seasonal population of adult manta rays up in Central Florida. Fishermen are well aware of this, this population. They use the manta rays to target cobia, which are fish that are sometimes found with manta rays. So when the manta rays are aggregating there, this is what it'll look like. There'll be lots of boats around these manta rays, and they'll be casting on the manta rays in order to catch cobia. So what we're going to do next is we're going to expand our work up here and talk with the cobia fishermen about developing a best practices for interacting with manta rays, how to not avoid maybe feeding or mating manta rays, and also determine if there's any critical habitats up there as well. We'll also be collecting genetic samples from both populations and determining if these two populations are related. And if anyone is a teacher out there or a parent, we recently developed these lesson plans that are designed for grades 3 through 5. They meet Florida State science standards. They can be found on the website below. But they deal with a lot of fun manta ray behaviors and facts while incorporating cool science lessons in there. And they're freely available to anyone who wants them. And here is all of our social medias. You can find us on our website as well. All our funders, and thank you guys for listening. I'm happy to talk way more about Florida mantas if you want. This is one of This is what you'll sometimes see manta rays do. Like Guy mentioned that they're very intelligent animals and they will exhibit inquisitive behavior. This is actually what happened the first time I got in the water with the manta ray and kind of what sparked my interest. But they'll flip over and swim upside down to get a better look at you and check you out.
Well, thank you both for those presentations. There was a lot of fascinating information, a lot of just even, I didn't know how unaware of even some of the basics about manta rays I was. The fact that manta rays are born 1 to 2 meters in length and fully independent. I wasn't previously aware of that. So again, we are going to open it up to questions now. If anybody has any questions, feel free to put them in the chat for either of our guests. But just kind of get things rolling. I'm curious to hear actually a bit more about that. Dr. Stevens, could you talk a little bit more about the early life stages of a manta ray coming kind of right out, pretty big in size and ready for the big old ocean out there?
Yeah, well, I guess one of the first things to say is that no one's ever seen a manta ray give birth in the wild. So we now have one female, I believe it's the same female, 4 or 5 times in captivity in Churimai Aquarium in Okinawa in Japan. She gave birth to multiple offspring, and so we have a record of how they give birth. We've got video of it and so on, which is great, but no one's ever seen it in the wild. So that is still very much a sort of a mystery about where they do it. Is it at night? Where are they doing it? I mean, I suspect it's they're obviously going into these habitats that are similar to the ones that Jessica's been talking about. It appears that juveniles do spend a lot of time in different habitats to the adults. Generally what we see, whether it's reef or oceanic mantas, is that the juveniles spend a lot more time inshore, in and around shallow coastal areas, along beaches like the ones that Jessica's been talking about. If it's in somewhere like the Maldives, they spend a lot of their time in these very shallow lagoons, sort of atoll lagoons, which have similar sandy areas, no more than sort of 30 or 40 meters deep. Also, they often are found in things like mangroves. So the juveniles are inshore, they're spending time generally in smaller home ranges, and it appears that as they get bigger, as they start to expand their territory, they become more confident of their surroundings, and they start to become less threatened by large predators, which obviously they're keeping away from in these shallow protected areas. They start to travel further, they start to delve out into different habitats, exploit more feeding opportunities, which might be richer in these more offshore areas. So that is sort of the life of a manta ray, would be, born shallow, stay local, and then start to explore and expand and travel further away into these other habitats as they grow. And that period might probably lasts at least a decade, probably a little bit longer before they reach sexual maturity.
And just to kind of clarify, what is the lifespan of a manta ray?
Well, it's another good question, and the answer is we're not 100% sure. We're starting to get a pretty good idea based on these long-term photo ID databases. So we have individuals now which we're pretty confident are in excess of about 40 years, but it appears that they start dropping out of these databases after 40 years, 45 years. So I think 40 to 50 years would be a pretty good indicator of lifespan.
Wow. It's just kind of fascinating to think of these animals that are pretty big, easy to see, and around for a fairly long time that we still don't know a whole lot about.
Completely.
We're getting some good questions in the chat now, and this one is from Miguel. Which way do manta rays see? The positioning of their eyes seem a little complicated. When I guess what he's asking is when a manta ray is facing forward, what direction are their eyes seeing in?
Well, they're obviously a bit like a cow in as much as they need to be more focused on predators that might be around them, as opposed to having bifocal predatory front of the face kind of vision. So while they can see in front of them and all the way around, maybe 280 degrees, they cannot see directly behind them. And they do have more of a blind spot underneath them. So Jessica showed you that video of that little baby manta, and often they can detect someone that might be up here and around them. But what they'll do is if they sense danger, they'll flip upside down and then they'll start to look at you because they can see with their eyesight much better pointing this way than they can back up. So that's why they'll often flip up and swim around you and say, oh, I can see what you are, keep away from me. I know, I'm sort of like, I'm on the lookout. So that curiousness is also a kind of a slightly nervous kind of defense mechanism as well, where they're looking to see what it is that they can sense behind them.
Wow, yeah, so quite a bit going on for what seems like kind of a simple animal at first.
Yeah, they're hugely engaging, very curious. There's very few animals that you can get in the ocean with that will come up and spend a lot of time, just literally finding out what you are. That curiosity, that social behavior that we see, coupled with these very large brains, all put together, indicate that they have, relatively high intelligence. I would certainly put them up there amongst the most intelligent of all the fishes, and way up above many of the marine mammals as well. So they're smart animals, but intelligence is hard to quantify, and it doesn't necessarily cross species as easily.
Yeah, great. I have a question here for Jessica. This is from Nicholas. Are there things that local free divers in the South Florida area and scuba divers can do to help maintain Florida manta ray populations? Are there things that our local divers should be aware of?
Yeah. So one thing they can do, and we didn't mention this in either one of our presentations, but it's probably should be mentioned, is that manta rays have a unique spot pattern on their belly. And that's how we researchers study these manta rays, is by getting a photo of the manta's ventral spot pattern. So if you're freediving in Florida and see a manta ray, if you're able to get a photo of the belly of the manta ray, you can send it to me. Find me on social media, or I just put some of the email addresses in the chats. And we can find out if that manta is in our database. And this gives us really important information, like what I was talking about, to determine critical habitat. We need to know, are these animals remaining in this area? How long are they remaining in this area? And we have lots of reports from local freedivers. I just also want to say that, if the manta doesn't want to interact with you, don't chase it or block its path of travel. You'll know if it swims away, you're not going to be able to keep up with it, even in your freediving fins. But usually if you're calm and relaxed in the water and stay to the side of it where they can see you, they'll be a little more relaxed.
Oh, go ahead.
Just to reinforce that, is that the best way to get a manta to come close to you is to give it some space, let it know you're there, and allow it to come and use its natural curiosity. Because if you chase after them, yeah, it's just going to leave.
As a cat owner, I know exactly what you're talking about. So just got to touch on.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, exactly. My co-host. Just got to touch on what you were just talking about sending in photos of manta rays so you could recognize based on the pattern of the spots on their underside. I'm just kind of curious to know, how often when you're out doing field work, do you recognize a manta ray you've maybe observed before?
Oh, all the time. Yeah, about half our manta rays we see more than once, and quite a few of them I know their spot patterns just in my head. So I get in and see them and know who they are. And some of them, like we talked about intelligence, they can have very distinct personalities. And there's some mantas who are very friendly and don't really care if I'm in the water with them. And there's some that want absolutely nothing to do with me every time I see them.
Yeah, so here's a question for either one of you. Do manta rays breach the water like other fish?
Yeah.
So
Yes,
yeah.
you go.
Yeah, the answer is yes. So like similar to whales, manta rays will breach. And we're still unsure as to why exactly these animals breach. It's been seen more during mating seasons, so it's possibly to attract mates. It could be to announce where food is. That sound of a large manta ray jumping and slapping the water will travel very far, so it could be some form of communication, or it could be to dislodge possible parasites like remors and stuff to get them off of the manta.
Yeah, I actually just a couple of months ago saw a manta ray jump out of the water right off the beach here in Pompano Beach, where I live, and I had never seen anything quite like that before. So I guess just think
very often here. I see it very rarely.
I had never seen anything like it, and I just kind of happened to be looking in that direction, and it just popped out. It looked like I was watching a David Attenborough film or something. It just popped out in like the most dramatic way possible. I had to guess for a second. I said, "Is that a manta ray?" Because I am not used to seeing manta rays in our region.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the trick is to try and get a photo ID of one that jumps out of the water. That's like it's the ultimate.
Photo.
I'll just stand there for a few months, just in the one spot waiting for that to line up. There's a question from Long. I think this is for Jessica. Is the manta you tagged in your presentation a male or a female? And someone else was asking, how do you tell the difference between a male and a female manta ray?
The one I showed in my presentation was a male, and the way you tell the difference between a male and a female is, Guy mentioned this earlier, is you will look at the pelvic fins, which are near the tail. Males will have paired structures. Oh yeah, there they are, paired structures called claspers. And this is true for all sharks and rays, is how you would tell the difference between a male and a female. And a female will not have claspers. And we can also use those claspers. They're helpful because looking at the size of those claspers is how I can easily tell if a male manta ray is sexually immature or not. So the mantas we see here, the claspers are all really, really small, which indicates that they're juveniles.
Interesting. Yeah, I guess that has me thinking of just some other things like Guy was talking about in his presentation earlier about just the way that manta rays developed and evolved over time. And I'm starting to wonder what other really unique characteristics like that do modern day manta rays have in common with modern day sharks? There's still a whole lot of crossover in different characteristics, kind of like that.
I would say one of the most, interesting things as an example of what we refer to as convergent evolution is a conforming to a similar strategy for survival, a strategy for life that occurs independently across multiple different evolutionary lineages. So we think about the biggest of all of the fish in the ocean, the biggest shark, that's the whale shark, followed by the basking shark, megamouth shark. These all independently evolved to become mega filter feeding giants. And within the world of the rays, the mantas and the devil rays, again, the largest of their group also evolved into becoming specialists at consuming these small plankton groups. And if we go outside of the fishes and we go to other marine mammals, we think about, we go to other marine mammals, we think about the big baleen whales, the humpback whales, the blue whales, of course. So generally, one of the interesting things is to be able to learn about a species by thinking outside of its taxonomic group. So manta rays, they're the biggest, they live a long time, they grow very large, they reproduce very slowly, they only give birth to one pup at a time, it takes them a long time to reach sexual maturity. These are characteristics that we see across those other lineages, those other different taxonomic groups that I mentioned. And this is an adaptation that helps them to maximize survival opportunities and successes based on that strategy that they've evolved to follow, that niche that they've gone down. So for me, learning about mantas, often you can gain greater insight by thinking more broadly about, well, what does this mean outside of their group as well, when you're trying to understand their foraging behavior or their reproductive ecology.
Fascinating how that works. I'd like to get to some more of the questions popping up in the chat here. I got some good ones. This one is from Mike. For either of you, are there any innovations in sustainable design or engineering that you can think of that are developed to help manta rays in any way?
Well, I mean, technology-wise, I mean, for example, you know, Jessica showed the data from the tagging that she's been doing. I mean, every year the guys that developed it, or the ladies that developed the technology for this telemetry work is just, you know, revolutionizing our ability to follow these animals. When we have these kind of snapshots where we can go into the ocean, record an individual, record what it's doing, but really, you know, for most of the time we don't know where these animals are going, what they're doing. So, you know, these new technologies, whether you're putting on board sensory equipment or tracking them using drones. I mean, a lot of the video footage that Jessica showed, I assume is from drones. You know, this is opening up a whole new area of understanding and knowledge. In terms of protecting them, they're starting to use satellite technology now to also help enforce protection. So in protected areas, big ocean areas where it's impossible to have patrol vessels covering such a large area, they're now starting to use satellites to track vessels and then to find targeted ways to prevent them from undertaking illegal activities. Yeah, so I mean, a whole variety of ways, and simple methods like having propeller guards on vessels, right, that hopefully don't reduce the effectiveness of the engines, but could help reduce those kind of horrific injuries that you saw in Jessica's video. So there's lots of simple ways and also technological, very complicated ways that we're really able to advance our knowledge and understanding of these species.
Excellent. I have another question here. I think this one is for Jessica, talking about the juvenile manta ray that you tracked up and down the Florida coast. What kind of data is there about other manta populations as far as like distances like that? Is that a common distance for that type of migration, or how might that progress over other populations of manta rays or even at other life stages?
Yeah, no, so that is a common like scale of distance that a manta ray can travel. Ours is a little unique, and Guy, you might correct me if I'm wrong here, but I don't know that much about the satellite tagging of juvenile manta rays, and this is a possible genetically distinct species, new species of manta rays. So we literally know nothing about the movements of these manta rays. But manta rays are capable of making long distance migration, hundreds of kilometers. So yeah, but we're still learning a lot about that here in Florida.
Yeah, I would add that generally juveniles have high fidelity to relatively small home ranges. So they're staying within tens of kilometers of the area which they were birthed at, we assume. And that starts to increase as they grow and they start to understand their habitat. There's probably some seasonality to regional productivity as well that drives these short, sort of small migrations. But then we also have, and when we have juveniles in the Maldives that will travel hundreds and hundreds of kilometers as well. So, you know, there is no hard and fast rule, but I tend to think of it like this, like as with many animals, there's this kind of variety of wanderlust within your genetic makeup, right? And there's some individuals that will often, you know, spend most of their life in one area, and then as they grow older, they might travel a bit more. And there's other individuals which go and travel huge distances, and those drivers can be a lack of food or an urge to mate, etc. And within mantas, we tend to see high fidelity to certain sites, but then there's often seasonal migrations as well that that cause, you know, migrations in the sort of the tens or the hundreds of kilometers. It seems that these big thousands of kilometer migrations are relatively infrequent, but they do happen. I mean, there's some evidence to suggest that these animals make huge migrations, but that's probably the exception rather than the norm.
Excellent. Getting a lot of great questions in the chat. I want to make sure we have time for all of them. So moving on, this one is probably more for you, Dr. Stevens, talking about stingers and how, if there's anything in the fossil record that would suggest how like modern stingrays have stingers, but manta rays don't. Is it a thing where manta rays had stingers at some point in the past and lost them somehow, or did that happen kind of after the branching out of stingrays and manta rays?
No, it's a good question. And actually, if you just look even within the family of the devil rays and the mantas, there is one species that still has a spine. And then the oceanic manta, which technically the Caribbean species that we've been talking about here today is still a part of, although genetically most people in the manta world believe that it's now a separate species. They have what we call a vestigial spine. So there's like a bump basically and a calcified spine underneath a little bump at the base of the tail, which is the remnants of the spine. And it's a bit like we still have, we still have the little, I don't know what it's called, but the little bone, we cocked it, right, at the base of our spine, which would have be the remnants of our tail from our primate ancestry. So for mantas, they've lost the spine simply because they've become so big that they don't need it. So the defense mechanism is moved to something else. But ancestrally, yes, within the group, they would have had a spine. They've just lost it over time.
Interesting. This is a question, I'd say for Jessica. This is from another Pompano resident, someone that lives in a high-rise apartment near the beach. Barry says he sees at least 1 or 2 manta rays a week swimming in pretty shallow waters in Pompano Beach. Wants to just make sure, is there any danger that they pose to swimmers or divers?
No, like I was just saying, they've lost their stinger or their spine. So it's not like a stingray that can actually like put a barb into you. Manta rays don't have any way to hurt you. So no, they don't pose any harm to swimmers, although I've watched so many times with the mantas swimming close to the public beaches. When the fins come out of the water, people will scream, "Shark!" and start running. So no, they're completely harmless. But if he wants to take photos and send them to me with time, date, and location, I'd be happy to hear about that. That's a little south of our general survey area, so it'd be great to get that information.
Excellent, great tips on some citizen science projects we can be doing here in Pompano Beach.
Absolutely.
Here's a great question. This one is from Danny, saying, in New Zealand, orcas hunt stingrays by flipping them over. Has there been any kind of hunting technique seen elsewhere in the world with other types of rays, or does this tend to happen with manta rays as well?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. Actually, there's a very similar thing has been recorded with orcas in the Galapagos predating on mantas, where they flip them over and and sort of like ram them. So yeah, it appears that the orcas are probably the ultimate apex predator for mantas or on mantas, and we have recorded it there. So yeah,
they're the ultimate apex predator, period.
Full stop. Well, except for humans, I guess. But yeah.
Yeah. All right, here's a great one from Alex and Andrew. How far do manta rays live, and where would you be most likely to see a manta ray in the United States?
So here in Florida, you're more likely to see one while walking down the beach than scuba diving, is what I tell people, because they're rarely seen on the reefs here, and our reefs are pretty heavily dove almost every day. So yeah, so when you're walking on the beach or out on a pier or on your boat, keep an eye out and look for this like big black shape that's moving through the water. What was the other part of her question?
Where are you most likely to see a manta ray in the US?
Honestly, in the US, probably here in Florida. They are seen all the way up the eastern seaboard, quite far north into like off of New York and stuff. but the waters, the farther north you go, the murkier the waters are, the colder they are, and there's just the less sightings.
I'm waiting for the climate to warm so much that mantas start occurring off the east coast of Canada where I live, and then I can start the Canadian Manta Research Project.
Well, among other issues, then you wouldn't get to travel to so many more interesting places.
No, obviously, I'm being flippant, but it's not that unrealistic. I mean, the most northerly sighting is off Nantucket Island, so it's only another 300 kilometers up to Nova Scotia. So, yeah, they're very seldom seen that far north, but it does happen. And I would add that if you want to see reef mantas, go to Hawaii.
Oh yeah, I forgot. I was thinking continental US.
A good one. So having a couple of questions about the size of manta rays. So what is the biggest that a manta ray will get, and which species of ray can grow the biggest?
Well, manta grow the biggest. They're the biggest of all the rays, and the biggest ever recorded, confirmed, was 6.8 meters, so 680 centimeters. So that's pretty huge.
Wow. So looking like, here's a great question. And I was wondering this myself because I'd never really heard of the harvesting of mouth plates in manta rays. And someone's asking if you know of, if you could maybe touch on a little bit of like, what is the background there? Is there some medicinal or fashion, or what's the thinking behind that?
Yeah, it's what we tried to dig into the origins of where this demand, this trade came from, and it appears that we know that manta rays and indeed devil rays are not desired as a food product. So the meat of mantas is very, very poor quality. I'll give you an example. Standard skipjack tuna, which is this kind of stuff that you get in your tuna cans at home, that sells for about $2 a kilo in the markets in Indonesia and in Sri Lanka. And manta meat in Sri Lanka will sell for about 20 cents a kilo. So it's like a tenth of the value of like cheap tuna. So the meat is not high quality. If it's fresh, maybe it's a bit higher value, but basically there was never a demand to fish these animals for consumption because they just don't taste great. However, about 20 years ago, people who saw an opportunity to market these animals into the Asian medicinal trade, where there's often a very strong attachment to natural remedies to human ailments. And there's no traditional basis. So you can't say that it's a traditional medicine, because we looked through the text, we spoke to TMC doctors, and they said there's no historical origins for the use of this medicine. However, about 20 years ago, someone thought, okay, there's these animals being landed in these fish markets, they're being by-caught, they're landed, nobody really wants them, and they came upon the marketing of their gill plates, so the parts of their gills that they use to filter the plankton from the water. So not the gills itself, but these gill plates. They take them out, they dry them, and they sell them in Asia. And the sales pitch goes a bit like this. These animals use these fish, that's what they're marketed as. These fish use these gills to filter their food from the water. If you consume this gill plate, you chop up a piece of it, you put it in a broth with some ginseng and some pipefish, this will purify your body, it will detoxify, it will cleanse, it will remove heat. These are the strap lines to the marketing adverts that go along with this product. And we think that there might be parallels between a demand for a product which helps to treat an increase in respiratory problems as a result of increased pollution in China. So like 95+% of all these traded gill plates go to Guangzhou in Southeast China, and people are consuming it to help them to deal with these respiratory circulatory problems. And we believe that that's where the origins of this trade occurred.
All right, so I know we're just about out of time. Got one more question from the chat, wondering how many, just to touch on, how many different species of ray are there in the entire world?
I think I put that in my slide at the beginning. I can't remember exactly. It's about 700 or 800 or so species of rays. I can actually just look now.
Too many to remember off the top of your head.
And then the number changes all the time. Yeah, so about 780 species of rays, because we're, with latest genetic research, obviously going out into the oceans, exploring the ocean depths, we're finding new ray species all the time. So the number right now, yeah, it's about 800.
Great, thank you. Thank you everybody for your questions in the chat. Just to kind of ask both of you upon closing here, what's the most important thing from your mind and the simplest thing that our viewers can do to help in manta ray conservation? And how can they get involved? How can, what should they study in school if they want to kind of go into the paths that you're in, or just if they're just casual conservationists around our area? What are some easy things that they can do to help or get involved? Dr. Stevens, we'll start with you.
Well, I think the biggest thing is really a reconnection to people with our oceans, right? People only care about the things that they feel a connection to, that they have empathy towards. So the more we can all do to re-engage with nature, to re-engage with the oceans, to learn a little bit about these animals, to impart some of that knowledge around the people that you're friends with, your family, get people to understand that we all depend on the oceans, we all depend on the natural world for our future survival. We don't live in a vacuum. If we're going to persist, if the world is going to be one that we want to live in, we need to think about protecting these animals, and just think about how much poorer we would be if the oceans were devoid of any manta rays. It would break my heart, and it would be a very sad world to live in. So I think that's the best thing, is just to start making people reconnect with and care more about the world that we live in.
Excellent. Jessica, I know we've mentioned a couple of citizen science opportunities and ways to get involved with the Florida Manta Project.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more with what Guy just said, and this is 2 days too late, but go out and vote for federal, state, and local politicians who support environmental policies. Here in Florida, we see with our water pollution, it's very up and close and personal to us. So to speak up on these issues and vote for people who are going to do something about them, as well as like educating children about these issues so that they grow up. I didn't even know what environmental science was growing up in Eastern North Carolina. And now you see kids who it's just part of what they know and how they move about in the world. And I think that's going to really help as this next generation comes up.
Excellent. We call those evergreen answers. Always stay educated, always stay involved, always be, discovering more. Guy, Jessica, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Lots of great information, fascinating to learn more about these animals that we're still learning more about. And to our younger viewers, I'll say by the time that you are up at our age, you'll probably, hopefully, know more about manta rays, and you could be the person discovering that. So thank you for joining us. Thank you for your presentations tonight. Just to touch on a couple of people asking in the chat saying they got in late or maybe had to step away for a minute. This is all being recorded. You could see it on our YouTube channel in the coming days if you want to go back and review or just watch it again. Along with a lot of other great content. We have some other great virtual events coming up, starting this coming Tuesday with our Science of Beer event. That one's just for the grown-ups in the room. And then on the 21st, we'll have Joey the Otter's birthday party. And then another distinguished speaker series brought to you by Save Our Seas on December 3rd. We'll be having a panel discussion about sharks, which is always one of my favorite events of the year. So please tune in for that. For more information, you can go to mods.org. Stay in touch with us at the Museum of Discovery and Science, and we hope to see you at future events, virtual and in person. So thank you for joining us, and thank you to the Save Our Seas Foundation for making this all possible. Thank you to Dr. Guy Stevens and Jessica Pate for joining us, our special guests. I'm Brady Newbill, Public Programs Coordinator at the Museum of Discovery and Science, signing off. Have a great night.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.